You're listening to Speak Now, jamming with my jazz and a little bit of singing today. I'm Gena, and this weekend we're going to be talking to awesome authors about their journey to writing and publishing. Today, welcome with your listening ear, TG Wolff. Hello.
Hello, Gena. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, it was my pleasure. My pleasure.
So I want to start off reading a little bit about TG. TG writes thrillers and mysteries that play within the gray area between bad and good, right and wrong. TG says cause and effect drives the story. Her diverse characters mirror the complexities of real life, balanced with a healthy dose of laughter.
So when you ask who I am, it kind of depends on the moment. Right now, I'm a writer. For a good 8 hours a day, I'm a civil engineer. For the rest of the day, I'm a mother and a wife. And keeping them all balanced is a good time.
Okay, I want to back up. Did you say a civil engineer?
I am. I have a master's degree in civil engineering.
How does civil engineering and writing mysteries come together?
I can't tell you how many times I've been asked that question, and so I've had to think really hard on the answer. And for me, it all comes down to figuring. I love figuring things out. I love figuring out puzzles. I love figuring out why things are broke. I love figuring out how a story gets put together. And so when you look at anything that you're creating from that standpoint, it's really the same thing. You're using the same parts of your brain. Maybe I'm using a little different skill set, but it's all about how one thing relates to another and how they fit together.
Okay. How do you have time for writing, being a civil engineer, full-time job, wife, and mom? Well,
a lot of it comes with patience from my husband and kids because there's only so much time in a day, right?
Right.
Every part of my life is what I'm passionate about. I don't believe in doing something that you don't love doing. So for as much as I love being a wife and a mother, I am as inherently a civil engineer. And so going to work is not a chore. It's one of the things I love to do. But we all need to take breaks. We all need to find places to play. And I go into my imagination, and that's where the writing is.
Ah.
And so it is as much a part of me as anything else. So how do I balance it? I mean, honestly, I don't write a lot compared to maybe people who do it full time. A lot of what I call writing, other people would call daydreaming. When you have those little bits of moments and you're off in your imagination and it's like, well, if I were to kill somebody, where would the dagger fall? And from that little nugget, you get this whole story. And it may take a week for that little nugget to turn into a whole scene. And then I sit down to write it. So when I'm actually sitting at a computer, it may only be for 2 hours, maybe 3 times a week. But when I'm out walking the dog or just have downtime where I'm driving in the car, that's when I'm doing all the figuring that goes into that 2 hours.
And then, TG, do you record it on a video recorder? Do you just make a mental note of it? How do you put that all together?
This seems to be something that's very different for every writer. For me, I see the stories as movies, and they will play over and over again in my head as I tweak the little details. And once it settles into what it is, I don't have to try to remember it because once I start at the beginning, the same movie plays. And so then the art of it becomes translating what I see with all the richness of texture and color and sound into something that somebody can read and get the same feelings. I don't necessarily go for the same images because, for example, if I'm trying to write something that startles a person, something different is going to startle me than is startling you. I could say, a spider walked across the floor, and for me that would mean, okay, I'm on the desk. But for you, it'd be like, well, I stomped on it. So really, you try to elicit the response in the reader that you're looking for, and rather than be very literal about the cause of it.
And that's the civil engineer party coming out, isn't it?
Cause and effect, yes.
So how did you get started on the journey to writing?
The journey to writing began between Cleveland and Cincinnati. And let me tell you, there's a whole lot of corn in between those two places. My youngest son had just been born, and I had a project down in northern Kentucky, and we lived in Cleveland at the time. And a couple times a month, I would have to drive down. And radio, the music and stuff just wasn't engaging enough, especially when you'd get really between the cities. And so I started daydreaming. And my first stories that I wrote stemmed around the idea that I have a brother who's a firefighter and a brother who works in policing, and they seem to always know these same people. And so I said, well, what if I had this character who had brothers? And, you know, how would this all fit together? And so this storytelling would just occupy me for the entire way. And then once I would get to where I'm going, I have a hard time sleeping in hotels, and so I would start to write them. And I think these books, I mean, these take 6 to 8 months to write. They're not like, oh, let me just kick this out here in a week. So I started writing to entertain myself. And I think that's where the humor comes in, because I never intended to write to be published, to entertain somebody else. I could just let it fly. If it made me laugh, it was good.
That's pretty cool.
If it was a reference that could get me to chuckle, it went in. We moved to Fort Wayne about 10 years ago, and I met a woman, Kira Jacobs, who was also on a writing journey. And she's so much more diligent about, well, let's see what's out there. Let's do writing contests and stuff. And she knew I had this one book written, and she's like, well, just submit it. You've already done the work, and it's really hard to argue with that kind of logic. That's where the civil engineering part falls apart. Like, well, she's right, I got it done. I didn't win the contest that we entered, but at that point, the woman said, hey, what you have seems like a really good fit for my publisher. Why don't you submit it? Now, the interesting thing there was I had written a mystery with romantic elements, but I sold it to a romance publisher. And so by the time it actually came to publication, it's an ebook called Lost in Tennessee. It is a romantic suspense, and it is equally romantic and suspenseful. So very different from that first concept that came out.
It just kind of developed.
And then from there, it ended up with a 3-book deal on the romantic suspense. And then things got kind of quiet, and you're not really sure what to do with that. Like, well, am I doing something wrong? And you're not. Same friend said, hey, I hear Down and Out Books is looking for queries. They're looking for new authors. You have Exacting Justice written. Why don't you send it in? Why don't I send it in? 8 weeks later, I get an email, and I'm assuming it's the, Dear Jane letter, thanks but no thanks, but it said, hey, we'd like to read the whole manuscript. Really? Sent the whole manuscript in. 6 weeks later, another email comes. You start sweating. You're like, okay, well, don't get excited. It's another Dear Jane letter. No, they wanted to pick it up. And so now I have a book published under my name, TG Wolff. That is my first love, which is a mystery.
So the first, what was published, did you say 10 years ago?
It was published 3 years ago.
Okay, what genre is that?
It is romantic suspense.
And so now what you're writing is mystery?
It's mystery. And the primary difference, there's several differences. The primary difference, of course, is that there is no romance in it. And the difference between a mystery and a thriller, really a mystery is a whodunit, where a thriller is more of a let's chase it. So this is more of a psychological type mystery where hopefully people who love puzzles will be able to see the little kernels that are sprinkled throughout it, because being the kind of person I am, I want a mystery to be solvable. I want
into
the
your
puzzle.
civil engineer, though, isn't it?
It is. All the pieces got to fit together.
How did you choose? This is self-published, or this is traditional published?
This is traditionally published.
And it chose you, of course. You didn't even have to try to self-publish it.
I did not. I had considered self-publishing a few times, but it really came down to I didn't have room in my life to be the marketer and the editor and the cover designer. I really enjoy writing books, and I really enjoy engaging readers about the things they love to read. But I don't need that other part. Now, maybe, when I retire or, we hit the lottery, then we'll consider it. But at this point, I like having professionals on my team who can give me input to make sure that what I put out is as high a quality a standard in my writing as what I require in all my other parts of my life.
What makes you stand out as a writer?
I had to struggle with this a lot, too, because I didn't go into writing to be a writer. I went into writing because it was fun, which I know there's going to be tons of people cringing, like, wait, she thinks writing is fun, but then she must also think math is fun. So what makes me stand out is this balance between the writing and the logical side. I like to play at the nexus of arts and science. I take what I do on the artistic side to make what I do on the science side better, and I take what I do on the science side to make the art side better. I think that there are not very many people out there who enjoy playing right on that cusp. There's a lot of people who are so strongly artistic that I'm so jealous at what they can do. And there are a large group of people who are far more analytical than I am, and I could never keep up with them. But what I do really well is play at that junction point between them.
You bring it together.
Yeah.
For people who are aspiring writers or aspiring, authors, what are some pointers you can give them?
One pointer is, if you want to be a writer, you got to write. Don't get too caught up in the being published or the being live on Facebook. Fall in love with the art of it first. The first thing you write, people probably don't want to hear this because I know I didn't, but it's not going to be very good because writing is a craft. You have to practice it. And part of that means, point number 2, you have to have people read your stuff, people that will give you honest feedback. Especially because with social media today, you are going to get the feedback. It is much better to get it when you can fix it than after it's out there permanently. Right. I think the third thing is to find cheerleaders. Like, none of us can keep up positive energy all the time. And I would not be sitting here talking with you about this book if it wasn't for Kira Jacobs, if it wasn't for my husband not cringing every time I say, I have an idea. If it wasn't for my kids who was like, no, Mom, we'll go with you to that book event. So embrace your cheerleaders and, say thank you to them. But let them help you, stay uplifted.
Can you read something tell us the name of the book?
Let me just start by reading the back cover.
Okay.
Okay, so the title is Exacting Justice. The sign read, Cleveland Corporate Limit. It was the head mounted under the sign that snarled the Monday morning commute. After the shock subsides, the city returns to its normal rhythm, underwhelmed by the violent death of another criminal. Until the next. The murders were horrendous, but there is a silver lining. It's now safe to walk Cleveland's toughest neighborhoods. Half the city calls for the police to end the killer's reign. The other half cheers the killer on. Caught in the middle is Cleveland homicide detective Jesus de la Cruz, a former undercover narcotics cop and recovering alcoholic. The cost of progress is more than he bargained for. Demands from his superiors, griefs from the victim's relatives, pressure from the public, and stress from his family quietly pull him apart. With no out, Cruz moves all in, putting his own head on the line to bait a killer.
You were going to talk to us about your dilemma with your characters.
A lot went into this book. When it started, again, because I wrote it for my own entertainment, I wanted to see if I could create a mystery where the killer could be male or female, any race, and any physically able-bodied age, so say from teen to senior citizen. And automatically that meant that the crime had to be a finesse crime. Because we're not going to have, a 14-year-old, 100-pound girl, choking somebody. And so it had to become something of a finesse. Then I wanted to see if I could make the person sort of disappear. And I had a really incredible conversation with the woman who runs the CSI department for Cook County, which is in Chicago. And she was just so informational on DNA and real crime scenes. And
this is part of your research beforehand?
Yes. Oh. And she was like, the hardest thing that she saw for me, because what I really did was have heads mounted around the perimeter of the city of Cleveland, Ohio, as a statement about drugs don't come in here. And she said, your hardest challenge is going to be, he's going to be seen, or she's going to be seen. That person's going to be seen. And so I really had to chew on that. And I'm like, okay, let's let them be seen. So if people are seeing my criminal, and yet this is still going to be a mystery, how are they not identifying him? And it comes down to one thing, incredibly average. Because when it comes down to statistics, the average man and the average woman are not that different. It's like 5'9" for a woman, 5'10" for a man, shoe size, very, very similar. And so it became a case where he's hiding in plain sight. Then when it came to my hero, so then I had this pretty well-developed villain. I knew why the person was doing what they were doing. I knew what they were doing. I knew how they were doing it. I knew all of the detail of the bad guy. And really, I feel like in mysteries, especially, bad guys, they move the story forward. Mm-hmm. The good guys only react to the bad guys, but the bad guys are the one who are like, I'm doing this, and then I'm doing this. I'm not waiting for a good guy to do something. And so then when I needed a hero, I struggled to find, I knew it was a him, and I knew he was a cop. And I had molds of different men that I know in real life that were sort of stand-in mannequins, but nothing fit. And then I went to a writers' conference down at Ball State. And one of the speakers there was a gentleman named Daniel Jose Older. And one of his sessions was called something to the effect of writing the other. And his whole point was to write different than you are. And it sounds like, so how could you need to be told that? It's not like I wrote every character was a woman. It's not like I wrote every character was 5 foot tall. Every character was Italian American. No, but yet I never really considered writing a different race than me.
And how do you prepare that?
Well, so what I ended up doing, once he gave me permission to not stay with all the cliches that I am, I went back to my childhood. So I grew up in inner city Cleveland, and my neighborhood was black and white and Puerto Rican. And so every day I would play, my best friend lived across the street, and she was Lillian Gonzalez. And so the men that were the fathers of my friends became my hero. Then I had him. I knew what he looked like. I knew what he sounded like. And so then it became fun, because then I talk about the humor part, bringing in elements from my own Italian-American background, which turns out really is not so different from Greek-American, Spanish-American, Jewish-American, with the grandmother or mother who is like, oh, you have to eat. Why? You have to eat. You have to get married. And so Cruz is not only in the situation where he's trying to solve this murder, but he's battling his parents or his mother. Even his name has a line of humor. His name is Jesus de la Cruz, which means, right, Jesus of the cross. Mm-hmm. I had the name de la Cruz. I did not know what his first name was. And I was thinking about his mother and the kind of woman she is. And, this very, very Catholic woman, and this is her first son. And of course she named him Jesus. And of course he's a cop, and he really doesn't like his name. And it sort of is with him every step of the way. So there's so many aspects as you're weaving this.
Right. Did you use a storyboard at all?
No, I do it graphically. So my storyboards look more like trees. Because the way I feel is, to do a mystery very well, I have to know absolutely what the bad guy did and why and how. And that's my starting point. And then I weave it back to figure out the starting point of the book from a reader's perspective. Mm-hmm. Because even though this may start on, Halloween Day, what the killer did actually started about 4 months before it. But since we read it from the hero's perspective, the hero doesn't get involved until on Halloween.
To solve it. Yeah.
Right. But all of that back stuff, even though you don't read it, as a writer, you have to know that it happens, or you're going to have holes. It's going to feel clumsy. It's going to feel like, oh, they really didn't think this through. And instead, to be able to intricately weave, okay, this happened back then, because, Cruise has to go back and try to develop the storyline, so he had to be able to refer to events that the reader doesn't know happened.
I'll bet you never got writer's block with this, did you?
No, I really never did. And whenever I did get a little bored, I would put some humor in it. I have a scene with his nieces where his mother is trying to set him up with, every time he comes out of church, his mother has another woman. And so he's got his 5-year-old niece trained. Whenever one of these women comes, she has to suddenly go to the bathroom. And he pays her $1 each time. Or I had a scene inspired by one of my brother-in-laws. Cruz is an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic. And he's starting in this book to rebuild his life and his friendships, ones that he turned away from when he turned away from alcohol. Well, he's going to a bar to meet his friends, and it's one of the hardest scenes for him. And yet his friend comes up and slaps a drink in his hand, and he's like, I don't drink. And he goes like, well, how do you pee if you don't drink? He's like, oh. Well, the funny thing was I made up a drink called a brass ball, which is 7-Up and cranberry. And so my brother-in-law, who is the alcoholic, he was out and he ordered it. I'm like, how did it taste? He's like, it was pretty good.
Tell us the title of your book again.
It is Exacting Justice.
And how can you be reached?
I can be found through my website, tgwolff.com. I can be found on Facebook at TG Wolff, and also on Twitter at TG_Wolff, and that's with 2 F. Thank you, Gena. This has been so much fun.
You have given me a wealth of knowledge. You are listening to Speak Now, jamming with my jazz at 95.7 FM WEOT.